Alrighty, so ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Databases in SQL video tutorial course. This is lesson number 22, and we're going to be talking about modifying tables. So, we've already, you obviously know how to create tables at this point. You also know how to delete tables at this point using the drop keyword, but we haven't yet talked about how to alter a table, how to modify it, how to change it to our liking. So that's exactly what you're going to learn in this lesson. You're going to learn how to add and remove columns inside of an existing table, and that's the key here. Is that it is an existing table. We're also going to learn how to change the columns inside of an existing table. So if you have, a column and you just want to maybe rename it or change its data type or what have you, we're going to learn how to do that as well. And we're going to look at how to add and remove constraints inside of an existing table. So the key thing here is, as you can see, we are always looking at the existing tables. We're never going to be creating a new one. We're going to be changing an existing table. So this is called altering tables. So we've learned how to, like I said, create and delete. So what do we use to actually, alter a table? What happens if we have a table that we like and it's full of data, but we want to change it, right? If it's full of data, we don't want to delete it and recreate it with the correct schema. Let's say we've made a mistake and we've made a mistake with the column name or with the column's data type, and we want to change that data type. We don't want to drop the entire table and recreate it because we're going to lose all the data inside of the table. So obviously, thankfully, the smart folks who created the structured query language thought of that scenario. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on the syntax behind altering tables. So let's start with probably the most popular way to modify an existing table, and that's how to add a column. So obviously and thankfully, adding a column is very straightforward. So here's the syntax that you're going to need. So in this particular example, we're going to be looking at our transactions table, and we're going to be adding a column that I've called transaction details. So essentially, we're keeping along the theme of a banking situation, and I'm going to obviously keep track of the details of a transaction. So instead of having, let's say your bank statement printed out from your database at the end of the month with all these debit and credits with the associated dollar amounts, instead of just having a random dollar amount, you're also going to see some details about that transaction. So it's not just going to be, hey, here's a debit transaction for $100 on the 1st of September, but also it's going to say it's a $100 transaction, a debit transaction from Starbucks on September 1st. And you could say, oh, that's right, I was at Starbucks and, I bought a gift card or something like that. So that's what our transaction details is going to keep track of. And, well, obviously we forgot to put that into our transactions table, so how do we do it? Well, it was done via the alter table command, as you can see on the screen here. So you say alter table, you give the name of the table you wish to be changing, and then you tell it what it is that you want to do as far as the alteration goes. So for this alteration, we're going to be adding a new column. So we just say add column. We give it the name of our column, which in this case I'm naming it transaction_details, and then we give it the actual data type that goes along with that particular new column that we're going to be adding. So in terms of talking about it in generalities, you just say alter table, table name, add column, column name, and then give it the data type. So although this might seem a little bit daunting or strange, it's actually very similar to when we created tables. So if you remember how to create a table, we just say create table, table name, then we have a bracket, and then instead of saying add column, the add column is already sort of implied because we're creating a new table, and then all we do is we list out the column names with their data types. Okay, and it's just column name, data type, comma, column name, data type, comma, column name, data type, comma, etc., etc. Okay, so this is very similar to the create table syntax, except for the fact that it's not a create table, we're altering the table. Okay, so there you have it. That's fairly straightforward stuff, and this is really that's all there is to it with adding any column. You can add column whatever name you want with whatever data type you want. You can use a varchar, you can use a char, you can use an int, whatever suits your fancy for whatever it is that you need to add for into your particular table. All right, so that's very straightforward stuff. So now let's talk about how to delete a column, how to get rid of one. So let's assume that you've made perhaps an error in your design and you want to actually get rid of a column. Here would be the relevant syntax for deleting one. And it's just, it's as simple as this. You say, again, alter table. So all the things that go along with changing the actual columns, you always start with alter table and give it the table name. And then instead of saying add column, we just say drop column. Okay, and give it the column name. So this the generic version of the script is just alter table, table name, drop column, column name. Okay, the difference between adding and dropping a column is that with adding, you need to give it the more information. You need to give it the data type. But when we're dropping the column, we obviously don't need to give it the data type because, well, there wouldn't be any. Why would you want to do that? There wouldn't be any reason for going into that level of detail because you're not ever allowed to have a duplicate column name. So again, it's implied that the data type going along with transaction details would obviously be dropped as well with the column itself. But not. I don't want to confuse you with that. So you just say alter table. Table name, drop column, column name, and you are done. You are good to go. Okay? So that's all good, great, and grand, but what happens if, like you said before, like I mentioned before, we were talking about altering tables and not wanting to drop an entire table because perhaps there's a bunch of data in it, and we don't want to drop it and recreate it again with a column that we may have missed, or maybe a column that we accidentally included that we should not have. The same goes for renaming a column. What happens if you have a column that has a name that has a typo in its name, or maybe a column that has a really long name and someone has decided to shorten the name, or perhaps the name wasn't really given to it very well and it's confusing to people, so you just want to rename the column. Okay, and whatever the case is, renaming a column can be a little bit dangerous. Okay, that might sound a little bit strange. Why would changing the name of a column be dangerous? Well, there's a very specific reason for it, and that is because if you are using a database as part of a larger application, so if you're using a database as part of a web-based application or a mobile application or what have you, then there may be references. I'm not saying there are for sure references, but there may be references inside of that code that references the column by its quote-unquote old name. Okay? So the name that it's currently, perhaps, like I said, the name has a typo in it. Let's just use that example and run with it. So we have a column that has a typo in it, and there has been, programmers out there that have put code into this application that are referring to this column with its typoed version of its name. So if you change the name to get rid of the typo, you could actually break the application because now the application is going in and looking for this column with a typo in it, but now I can't find it because we renamed the column. So it's a little bit dangerous, and that can, God only knows what that'll break inside of the application, but you always have to be careful. Whatever the reason is for you need to change the column name, just be careful. The common sense way to approach it would be to search the entire code base for the name of that column. And if it doesn't appear anywhere, then it's probably safe to rename it. If it does appear in places, well, then you're going to need to update that code in those places with the new name of the column. Okay? So again, this is only really in the case that you have already, joined your database to an existing application in some way, shape, or form. Then that becomes a potential problem. Okay, if you just have your database all on your own, then of course you can rename the columns to your pleasure as many times as you want. Go ahead, knock yourself out. It's not dangerous. All right. So having said that little caveat, let's talk about the syntax around renaming a column. Well, surprise, surprise, we start with alter table and give it the table name. So in this case, it's going to be transactions. And now we say change column. Now this is where it can get a little bit crazy in here, but it's not that crazy. I can explain it. What you do is you type in the existing name of the column. So you're saying change column, and you give it the name of the column you want to change. And then you give it the new name of the column, whatever the new name is going to be, and whatever the new data type is going to be. Okay? And I use the name new, so here the generic syntax for it is here. I use the term new loosely, because if you're just changing the name of the column, then you're not going to be changing the data type. So if we wanted to change the transaction type, like you can see in this example, the transaction type, believe it or not, was already a char1 data type. So although we're specifying char1 here, that's not being changed in any way, shape, or form. It's going to remain a char1. It's not going to change, but because of the way the syntax works, you need to supply the name of, or the data type itself, okay? Or vice versa. Maybe you want you don't want to rename the column, you just want to change the data type, okay? And if that was the case for transaction type, if let's say you want to change the transaction type to have 2 characters instead of just 1, you would say alter table, transactions, change column, transaction type, and then you would put transaction type again, so you'd have the same identical name, and then you put char2, okay? And then there you go, you've just changed the data type for that column. So that's how you rename a column, or even, I didn't say this, but you can change the data type of the column as well using this exact same syntax. All right? Cool. So that sort of concludes our talk on modifying columns within tables, but now let's get on to our talk about constraints inside of a table. So sometimes you realize after you've created a table that you need to add new constraints. Okay, and this is very, very common. It's completely fine, in my opinion, for you to, forget or omit a constraint, and then you want to sort of make your database a little bit tighter, or a little bit more, not secure, but a little bit more insusceptible to bad data or something like that by adding constraints. You can, by all means, do it this way. So constraints are things like foreign keys, primary keys, unique constraints, whatever it is, they constrain, that should say they constrain, not they constraint. Give me a second, let me change that right now because that's going to bother me. So voila, they constrain what data can be inserted into a particular table based on some predefined rules. Okay, that's what constraints are all about. They force rules to be applied to the type of data or the data that can be put into a particular table, or rather a particular column, okay? So here's how to add these constraints after you've already created the table without those constraints. So you say, for this example, we're going to be adding a foreign key constraint. So we're going to say alter table, give it the table name, which is transactions. We're going to add constraint foreign key. Okay, so we're actually going to say foreign key because that's the type of constraint that we're using. We're going to give it the name, a name for the actual constraint itself. So we're not talking about the name of the column. We're not talking about the name of the table. We're talking about the name of the constraint itself. Okay, because believe it or not, they have names for those things. So the typical convention, at least this is what I saw at the company I used to work for, is you give it the name of the column that you're actually applying the constraint towards, or to, and then you put 2 underscores and give it the abbreviation for the type of constraint. So foreign key is abbreviated to FK. So the constraint is going to be a foreign key constraint on the bank account ID column. So just by looking at the name of the constraint, you can see exactly what the constraint is without having to look at the actual code behind it. So say add constraint foreign key, bank account ID, FK, and then we're going to be giving it the name of the column itself, which exists on this table. So within the transactions table, there is a bank account ID. So again, the name itself has nothing to do with, just giving it the name. It's good for us humans. It's human readable, but it doesn't tell anything towards the actual system itself. It doesn't tell MySQL anything about what's going on. This is just for our own readability. You could name this constraint, cheeseburger if you really wanted to, but that just wouldn't help us as human beings and being human readable. So now we need to tell the actual computer, the actual database management system, how or what it is that we're going to be doing with this foreign key constraint. So we're going to say that we're applying the foreign key constraint to the bank account ID, okay? And this is it's inferred that it's going to be on or inside the transactions table. So there should be a bank account ID column in the transactions table. And then we're going to say that foreign key constraint references, okay, it points to the bank account table and the bank account ID column within the bank account table. Okay, so this is a little bit complex, and you probably will likely have to keep on looking back and referring back to the syntax for this particular type of operation. I know I do all the time, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not that big a deal. You can easily go back and look at the, for reference sake, look at what the syntax is, and then you'll be able to do it no problemo. And of course, here's the generic syntax for adding constraints. But in this case, I say any constraints, but really this is specified or strictly specifying the foreign key constraint. So this is, if you took foreign key out of there, then it might be more generic in terms of any constraint. But in any case, this is the syntax, which I just talked about: alter table, table name, add constraint, foreign key, the name of the foreign key, the column inside of this table, references, the name of the table that it's going to be pointing to, the foreign table that's going to be pointing to, and the name of the column on that particular foreign table. Okay, cool. So that's how you add them. How do you delete them? Sometimes you realize after you've created a table, you need to delete constraints because maybe they are just too specific. They're too tight on your data, and you're running into a lot of problems, and it's causing a lot of misery, and you just want to get rid of the constraints because they're causing more harm than good. So here's how to delete them after you've already created a table with them. Again, this should say with them. So again, let me hit pause and let me fix that because it's going to drive me crazy. Okay, moving on. So you can say alter table, table name, drop foreign key, and then give it the name of the constraint. Okay, so again, all constraints have names, and let me actually, I'm going to show you how to find out what the names of constraints are called, because in the case that I showed you before, you'll know what the name of the constraint is because you chose it. But if you were to create an actual constraint while you are creating the table, so inside of the create table script that we have done like many lessons ago when we actually created the transactions table, I had inserted a foreign key in there, but I did not specify a name for that foreign key. So how are you going to know what the name of the foreign key is if you didn't pick it? Okay, because the relational database management system is going to assign its own name to that particular key, or rather to that particular constraint, the foreign key constraint, and you're not going to know what it is. So let me show you how to go about finding out what that actual constraint is called. Okay, so I've just flipped over to my the Toad for MySQL. This is how I know how to do it inside of Toad. I don't know if you're using a different application. I can't really help you with the other ones because it would take me forever to go through every single different type of IDE for SQL, or rather MySQL, to actually go through them and show you how to do this. But in any case, this is how you do it in Toad. So what I do is I go to my actual, the actual schemas, the schema is another word for an actual table. So these are my tables that exist inside of my database. So if I go to transactions, which is the table that I've created, I can double click on it. So I'm going to double click on transactions, and it's going to open up this viewer. Okay, so it says viewer, table, and then it gives me the name of my database with the actual name of the table itself that we're viewing. And as you can see here, they're kind of hidden. There's these little itty bitty tabs that you can go through to get more information about the table. So if you click on constraints, you can actually see the actual constraints that exist on the table. So if I expand this a little bit, you'll see I have this transactions IBFK_1, which is a foreign key, which is bank account ID referencing bank account ID column on the bank account table. So there you go. That's my foreign key constraint. This is the name of the constraint, transactions IBFK_1. And ignore these little quotes here. I haven't talked about these little quotes yet, but let's not worry about them, just because they just help identify the actual. Well, I don't want to get into it right now. It's kind of pointless at this point. So let me just say this is the name of the actual constraint itself minus the little quotes. That is the name that you can use to actually delete the constraint itself. So if I go flip back to my my presentation, that will fit in right here in the constraint name. Okay, that's what you put in there. It will be transactions IBFK_1. When you put that in there, alter table transactions, drop foreign key, boom, the name of that constraint, run it, and sure enough, it will delete and remove that constraint off of your table on your behalf. Okay, so take care, guys. All the best, and I can't wait to see you in the next lesson.